But I would like to give floor to Ben for your comments.
Okay, yeah, everybody can hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. First of all, Giovanni, for your presentation, and Benedetto for sharing this. This is quite something to digest. I think it took you quite a bit of time to explain the details of the model and the data that you have been using. So I hope, yeah, there's still quite a few people on board. I hope everybody was able to understand what was going on. For me, it was quite a challenge to read this on the basis of the PowerPoint slide that you sent to me, Giovanni, because it's really an interesting paper with a new methodology that is quite challenging for novices like me. It's very new to me, but it seems to be a very interesting methodology that you might want to explore further, and also that you might want to also look at restrictions. I think my main feeling after reading and listening to you is that the outcomes that you present are, I think, just as good as the data that you have when you are estimating your model. And I think in particular the kind of data that you have are quite restrictive in a way. And I will try and ask my first question around the data, because I think you're specifying a model where you actually have only one level in terms of the levels where policy instruments work through. I mean, you're having a paper on the impact of funding instruments, funding policies on performance. And as we all know, in higher education, we are in a multi-level type of system where higher education institutions receive money from different sources and distribute the money across their various disciplines and faculties and research groups and academics. So there's a lot of layers in the model that the funding instruments trickle through and down to the let's say shop floor level. And your model is actually only specifying one level, which is the level of the institution that you're looking at. And the institution is receiving three types of funding sources. It's the core funding, it's the third-party funding, and it's the student fees. And what you seem to suggest, as far as I can see, is that those three types of funding are treated as if they are the similar kinds of instruments across all the types of institutions that you have in your database. I mean, what core funding is in Spain is also the same kind of, let's say, beast that core funding is in Germany or in the UK. And my feeling is that that's a bit besides the truth. I mean, core funding is a very heterogeneous type of phenomenon. You treat it as a treatment variable. That's your terminology. It's a treatment that you apply across a system. So it's kind of like a vaccine that is applied to patients, and the patients are higher education institutions, and they receive a treatment on the basis of three types of medicine. But what I would say is that the types of the medicines, the three types, the core funding, the third-party funding, and the tuition fees, they are actually quite different from across the different types of higher education institutions in your very big database. Because core funding in Germany is based on a very different set of rules than core funding in the UK. We all know that core funding in the UK is based on very much on outcomes and impact indicators, and that the German core funding is very much based on history and stability, and there's not a lot of variation there. So I would say that the vaccine, the treatment, is very different. The core funding in Germany is very different from that in Italy. So my question to you is, what does that mean in terms of the results of your analysis? Is it a fair assumption to say that core funding or third-party funding is the same kind of phenomenon in the different institutions in your data set? So I would expect that the variation in the responsiveness scores, if I understand them right, what a responsiveness score is, that the differences in terms of the responsiveness scores within one country are much smaller than the differences in responsiveness scores between countries. And so I would say that, and that is probably something that your data is also showing, that your results is showing. If you, in these big clouds of data that you have been showing in your presentation, there must be patterns somewhere, I think, that highlight that indeed that the within country variation in terms of scores is maybe smaller than the between countries scores. And that would be my feeling if I read. But the reason is that the treatment variables and the three funding policies, let's say the three vaccines, are applied to patients, higher education institutions sitting in very different systems, very different contexts. And the contexts are so different that the results will actually show that. So that would be my first question. To what extent do you see country-specific patterns in your results, and could they be traced back to the different, let's say, institutional settings in the different systems? When I look at your data, I think in the first descriptive in your slides, you show the data. There's a lot of institutions from the UK, a lot of them from Germany, and quite a few from Italy, and very few from other countries. So I think that the results of your study is very much dominated, I think, by the UK, and they are kind of like the average across all the different countries. The results. So then my second question would be, what is the policy relevance of your results, and what can policymakers make of this? Can they really come to the conclusion that it is interesting to increase core funding, or because it increases the quality of the publications? I think the results is very much driven by the, it's kind of like, in reality, the results are very much dependent on where a country is sitting in terms of the combination of core funding, third-party funding, and tuition fees, because these three things, core funding, third-party funding, and tuition fees, in the ITER database, as far as I know, combined are the total budget of the institution. So often the government is reducing core funding and at the same time increasing third-party funding. Third-party funding is a very heterogeneous box of things. It's a collection of all kinds of revenue sources, including public and private revenue sources, and changes in the third-party funding are, I would say, very difficult to interpret in the ITER database, because it's such a heterogeneous thing. So what can policymakers make of the results that you have been showing on the third-party funding, for instance? Is it useful for them to know about the results coming out of your study? I think I'll leave it here for a moment. I have more questions, but I think maybe you can try and address some of my concerns. It's a really interesting paper, like I said, but I have some problems with the fact that you are using the data in such a, I would say, such a way that there is no room anymore for country-specific variations. Maybe it's caught in some of the variables in your model or in the fixed coefficients in the model. I don't know, because I had expected that there would have been at least an allowance for the country specific things that drive revenues in each of the systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Okay.
And I would like to add a point on my side, because I found the paper very interesting, and what I take home is really this interest we have on heterogeneity of responses by institution, which is something which luckily goes well with having disaggregated data at institutional level. And this follows and details a bit the comment of Ben. What we are doing is comparing across subjects. I like the word treatment used by Ben, and comparing responses to a treatment across subjects, cross-sectionally. This creates a number of issues. One is you should be very careful for policy implications, because policies don't work across subjects but on the same subjects, and you know that's why economics made the distinction between cross-sectional and time panels, and usually you would need time series to have the effect on the same university, because there might be responses might be heterogeneous, like you say. And the second, this would mean suggesting you to focus less on policy implications. That seems to me very, very dangerous to drive, rather to understanding heterogeneity in responses. And there are two types of heterogeneities, one link associated with the national policy context, and one associated with the individual organization characteristics. For example, we know that the role of student fees is totally different between private and public institutions. And then you would expect your responsiveness scores are systematically different between public and private. So I think if you would analyze, like Ben suggested, the distribution of characteristics based on the scores you have, there could be some interesting lessons. I very much doubt you can get policy implications. My second concern, I have also a smaller concern, but it's about size. When you normalize by size, you make a strong assumption and you create additional problems. The strong assumption is that organizations, higher education institutions, scale by size, because otherwise, if you normalize by size and responses systematically differ by size, you risk having a problem. And we know by the paper we published last year that, for example, outputs are non-linear across size. So you normalize by size, but so the responses of a university with 3,000 academic staff will be different from the responses of a university with 10 academic staff. And then the other related comment, since we work very much on data, normalizing by size creates a lot of statistical problems, because you get very quickly outlier in all distribution, which are university with 3 people and 10 publications, which seems to be better than Oxford. So in some way, if you use size normalized variables, you need to be very careful about the data. Small mistakes in the data for small institutions translate in a lot of variance, and translate also in a lot of heteroscedasticity across sites. Okay, these were my comments. I think we can give you the floor back, and then in the meantime, if all the participants want to post questions, we can follow next round. Giovanni, it's up to you.
Emanuela, do you want to reply, or can I start? Or...
Yes, thank you, Giovanni. I would like to say something about the comments, which are extremely good, and thank you very much for this. I think it's the problem of a multi-level type of system of higher education is a central one. However, there is one thing that I have the impression that there is one simple misunderstanding in a presentation, maybe. The presentation was not about policy instruments. It's about policy input. It's not exactly the same. I mean, we are speaking about levels of resources, not about means. No, it's a difficult thing, because most of your, it's of course what you said, it's perfect. I perfectly agree. But again, it is not something which is likely to understand how core funding is managed by as policy instrument or third-party funding. It's the level of resources that the higher education institution receive that generates some responses. This is what has been tested in this exercise.
That's a
But
policy.
if I might defend Ben, it's clear that, but
it's not defending,
the amount is different depending on how a core funding is allocated.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, there is all the discussion about how the policy has been, how the level has been reached. So what determines the level of. But having knowledge about effects generated by the availability of higher level of resources in some ways is interesting to me to understand what the effects might be. Whatever the policy instrument is, the results of having such a level of resources is something that has to be considered. I mean, we can speak about the engineering of distributing the resources, and we can speak about the level of resources. In this case, we don't speak about the engineering, so the policy instruments, but only about the level. It means that, of course, all the results must be discussed and must be created a narrative to let people understand that this strongly depends on the type of instruments. As to the variation between countries, this is not a comparison between countries. This is just a sample. It is a biased sample, I agree. And of course, if you go inside a single country, you find that the variability within the countries is higher. We have tested this in Italy. It's higher than in the case of the general sample. So this is, I completely agree with this kind of observation. Okay, it is obvious that the understanding can be divided between what is in the hand of national policies and what is in the hand of the higher education institution. That's perfect for me. And of course, this is something that has to be done in the evolution of the paper. For the time being, it's just to present the fact that this test can say something about the level of resources that the organization have at their disposal. And good, of course, thank you, Benedetto, the warning about the normalization is very important. Yes, it is can be a source of bias. I'm quite perplexed about the possibility that this kind of results, despite the fact that they have to be refined, cannot have any meaning for policymakers or decision makers. I think that they have one of the most important aim of indicators, so have the capability of signaling something. They signaling simple that the importance of co-funding as a mean to steer higher education institution. That's perfectly in line with what the higher education literature said. So if you allow universities in the way you want to have higher level of co-funding, you might have a less heterogeneous responses between organization and more persistent in time. And on the other hand, if you adopt policies which allow people, organizations to have higher level of third-party funding, the effects might be more heterogeneous. And you can have in the long term more winners and losers. That's the policy implication. It's not something that can prescribe what policy makers can do, but they thus can be aware of what the effects of higher or lower level of resources can generate. So in this sense, I mean that I think that there are policy implications that can derive from this work. Again, this is a research work for the time being, not already mature to provide policy suggestions as far. So that's all, and thank you again for the comments. Very, very useful.
Okay, thank you. I would like to open the floor.
Can I just respond 1 minute to Ben and to you, Benedetto, or
if you want, yes.
1 minute, just 1 minute. Okay, just to, I agree completely to what, of course, Emanuela said. The only point regards the possibility to look at the, I would say, country heterogeneous effect, for example. Okay, that's not a big problem here, because suppose that you are considering the right-hand side, let's say, of a given this responsiveness score distribution. So this methodology allows us to count the number of institutions in a given country having a positive or a negative effect. So with that, we can disentangle these aspects. For example, you may say how many, okay, let's say 100 as the number of institutions having a positive effect when, on a given outcome when you consider the core funding. Okay, yes. And another part is negative. Please, can I know the percentage of UK institutions, Spanish institution, Italian institution in these tails? Yes, we can calculate this. I didn't know that. We didn't do this, sorry. We didn't do this, but we can do. And to be honest, I have to thank you, Ben, because this is a very good idea that we would like to exploit. It's a very interesting point to analyze also the country composition of the responsiveness score.
Okay,
and,
so I would like to give Giovanni. I would like to give you
another, just very fast. Thank you also to Benedetto, because the point you raised about private and public institutions and the role of fees may be very interesting to explore and analyze. So same, we can split our analysis in order to see how many responsiveness score, positive or negative or high or low, belong to private or to public institutions. Thank you very much for this.
I would like to give the opportunity to all the participants if they want to ask any questions. Philippe, I see you.
Yes, I like your discussions about countries and the effects of country policies or country systems. Maybe an in-between way, saying there is no effect or it's all country specificity, would be to use the type of work that has been done about the typologies of higher education systems, and then look at compare the distributions. I mean, do the distribution for each type and compare the distributions. And if you do that, then you can start answering whether whatever way the treatment is done, or depending on the way the treatment is done, it might have different effects. So there might be different ways, different ways to allocate the treatment, but maybe these different ways end up with a similar effect or not. So you could at least deal with that by discussing that for comparing distribution between different types of higher education systems.
Okay, thank you.
A very nice way to render your model your approach far more robust, or to build good limitations in
thank
the way
you. I see Thomas, you wanted to say something. Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to say thanks, Giovanni, for the very interesting presentation. I just wanted to say that, to my view, you can really significantly increase the value added of your study when you try to look at patterns in your responsiveness scores. And it's not only about countries, but also about other characteristics you may look at, like what is the field, what is the type of university, and so on. Because then it really makes sense that you use such a sophisticated methodology to look at these issues. Otherwise, you come up with similar results that you also get when you do the standard regression. So I really would motivate you to look at these scores and try to find clusters inside by country or even by region or by other types of characteristics. That's one point. And then I have a methodological question, Giovanni. Is it so when you add this random variable and you estimate the random variable with some kind of factors, would it also be possible to add these factors directly to your main regression as interaction variables with the other variables? Okay,
I think there is a question in the chat. Unfortunately, my chat is not so a point. It's important to take into account also internal financial allocation autonomy, because of course third-party funding is allocated very differently with a different level of discretion than university funding. I think that's a note which might be useful. Are there other comments or questions? So if not, I wanted to ask if Emanuele and Giovanni want to give further comments or answers.
Emanuela, do you want to reply to Philippe, and I will reply to
no reply to Philippe. I completely agree with what he's saying. So
yes, me too. Same. I thank you, because what we are going to do as a next step is exactly to disentangle the effect by institution type. Absolutely correct. Absolutely.
And if I may add also the comment in the chat by Nora Benevot Provot, it's very important. Of course, it's very much in line with what Ben was suggesting, to take into account that regulatory systems and so the way in which the policy instruments are implemented is very different by country and can generate different responses and effects. Thank you for this.
And of course, I agree with Philippe, and this might be something we discuss when I come to Rome. Typologies are a useful way to summarize organizational heterogeneity. And so this might be something where we combine regression-based your methods with the typological approaching I'm using.
That could be a very good, very nice evolution of the paper. Thank you.
Can I reply 1 second to Thomas? Just the last point of Thomas, which is a bit methodological, but it's very, very nice, because basically Thomas understood exactly what is the magic behind the model. Yes, Thomas, it is exactly an interaction model.
Not completely.
No, you got it. You got it. It's an interaction model, because anytime you're going to substitute the coefficient of the regression by something that depends on the other covariates, basically you are multiplying the factor you want to analyze with the other factors. So the model becomes highly non-parametric, because it has many interaction inside, many products, right? This makes it possible, to estimate the distribution of the effect, and at the same time to have a sort of very strongly nonlinear model. So you catch the two at one shot, right? So yes, but you were right, because it's exactly a fully interacting model between the factors and the other factors.
Okay, thank you. And I would take over the other comment by Eleonora Beneteau-Privot. It would be interesting to, as a robustness test, at least to exclude UK and to redo the analysis. UK is really, in own analysis we did, and also in policy perspectives, a total outlier in Europe. The composition of funding is a total outlier, so it would be interesting. With this, if there are no other comments, I think we had a very interesting and nice discussion. So this proves really to be a fantastic setting to discuss the usage of data, and maybe to open to all of you the idea that you could exploit this data for doing also your research, and you would welcome also contributions from outside RISIS. And I think, Serena, you wanted to put the slide on next seminar. So you see, next seminar will be 11th of November, at same time, same setting, basically, on R&D networks and their effects on heterogeneous modes of knowledge creation. So we will go into a spatial econometric perspectives, and this will be held by our colleagues Thomas Schengel and Martina Neuglen from Austrian Institute of Technology. So I really wish we have you back on the next seminar, and also on the other RISIS events which have been organized. Thank you, and if there are no further comments, a special thanks to the presenters, a special thanks to Ben for its very good discussion, and a nice afternoon to everybody.
Thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Ben, thank you, Benedetto. Thank you, Philippe.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.